There are some things in life at which we are terrible. Not just kind of bad, mind you, but atrocious, abysmal, awful. Things that we couldn't do if our life depended on it. Now, fortunately, those things are different for each of us. While some of us might have a list that includes cooking or biking or climbing or yodeling or yo-yoing or teaching or preaching, others of us have a totally different list of things that include those which we basically have no talent at. And in some ways, this gives us comfort. It adds to the variety of life. If we were all bad at the same things, life would be rather boring. We would know our limits as a human community and never venture to push against them. It would be awfully hard to dream. After all, we would already know what we couldn't do. But that's not who we are. No, friends, by the grace of God, we have been blessed, each of us, with things at which we are terrible. The good news is that no one is good at everything. And we don't have to be. If we were good at everything, we could survive on our own. We could operate on ourselves when we had an ailment. We could fix our own cars when we needed to get someplace. We could preach our own sermons when we needed some inspiration. But friends, as we learn from hard experience, operating on ourselves is hard. Cars make basically no sense, and preaching is better left to the untalented. No, friends, by the grace of God, the fact that we're not good at everything reminds us that we need each other. Because while no one is good at everything, everyone is good at something. And if we want to survive in this world, if we want to thrive in this world, then we will have to lean on one another. Fortunately for us, the closer we lean, the easier it becomes to dream. This is a weekend in which we remember the power of a dream. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was good at a lot of things. He was a gifted preacher, a talented organizer, and a faithful follower of Jesus Christ. And he had a particular dream for a particular moment, and he cared enough to share it with the world. He had the audacity to dream in public. Perhaps he recognized that as gifted as he was, as great an orator, as important as his dream was to the common good, if he didn't share it with others, it would die. Remember, he was a preacher first, and so he surely had read this passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, not the one we typically go to in 1 Corinthians. No, this is chapter 12, the chapter right before that one that we get to, but we have to understand it before we get to the one on love. For that one to make sense, we first need this one. He was a preacher, and he recognized the promise that comes to us in this passage, as was so beautifully read this morning, that passage which promises each and every one of us have gifts from God, that there are many gifts among us, but the same Spirit. They are disparate gifts. We all have different gifts, but we can use them for the common good. We can certainly use them for ill as well. but we are best when we find a way to use them for each other. You see, he knew that if he were to share his dream, then other people with other gifts would bring it to life. Friends, we too have dreams. As individuals, as a congregation, as a community. And if we want to bring those dreams to life, and we do, it will take each and every one of us using the gifts that God has given us for the sake of the common good. Now, the challenge, of course, is that it's hard to figure out our gifts. We're much better off. It's much easier for us to find those gifts that we have added to the list of things we don't have. Most of us have a list like that that's filling up a little more each and every day. We know the things that we can't do. It's harder for us to find those things that we can. And frankly, we live in a society that is not shy about telling us when we need to add another item to that other list. So you think you can dance. No, the challenge is finding those gifts given to us by God and figuring out how we are going to use them for the common good. But since we're here, friends, let us use the gift of time, the gift that we have been given in this moment, to consider 3 hints, 3 tips for finding our spiritual gifts. The first is to do it in community. That if we want to find those things at which we excel, if we're looking for the gifts that God has given us, it helps to be in relationship with someone. Person to person, face to face, heart to heart. In other words, if we're looking for a way to use our gifts for the common good, we must first start by holding something in common, by coming together. A lot of damage can be done when we just look at people and assume we know what they can or cannot do. We likely remember times from our own lives when people have done that to us. When people have assumed they know who we are. But friends, not everyone who is tall can play basketball. Just as everyone with big feet can't swim. We can't always judge a book by its cover. We don't always know what is going on in the soul of a person or what they have to offer this world. The only way we can get to know that is by getting to know them, by meeting them face to face, not as some blind other group, but people with names and histories and relationships, people who want and long for different things out of this world. It is only in relationship that we can begin to find our gifts, that we can help one another find our gifts. The good news is we know of at least one place where we can form those relationships. Friends, even if there's not another place in your life, we are in one right now, and we do this in good ways and sometimes in poor ways, but at our best, the church is a community that listens to one another and tries to name our gifts. It's why we've committed to being in worship as often as possible in this year and inviting others to join us, because we know we are better together, that it is a process of trial and error that we do best together. Which brings us to our second hint, our second tip for those of us trying to figure out our gifts in this world. The second tip is this: don't be afraid to fail. Think of a child learning to walk. Typically, she doesn't just stand up from a lying down position and begin to walk. That's not normal. No, normally she stands up, finds her way, has to figure out the balance, but spends some time falling flat on her face. And then, when it's working right, she has someone around her to help get her on her feet again. Sometimes we will fall flat on our face before we find the thing that we are good at. We spend so much time in our lives trying to avoid looking like failures. But the truth is, we all are. There are always things in our lives that we will fail at. Sometimes in big ways and sometimes in small ways, sometimes in lasting ways and sometimes not, but all of us will have some moment in our life in which we fail. And sometimes the difference between finding our way through it or not is having a community around us when we do. That, too, is who we are as a church. If we can't fail in church, where can we? If we can't have this place, this space to try on a hat and not be afraid when it doesn't fit, then where can we do that? And it turns out this makes a difference in people's lives of faith. The difference between a young person who grows up in the church and leaves the moment they get the chance, or a young person who grows up in the church and finds a life of faith, is often the ability to fail in a group. They report being able to fail in a community, to try something, to stand up and try something new and not be afraid to fall flat. To be clear, we shouldn't set one another up for failure. That's not what we're about. But we should support one another when we do. Which brings us to our third hint. We should not be afraid of the truth. The fact is, none of us are good at everything. And there will be some things in our lives that no matter how hard we try, no matter how much practice we put in, no matter how many attempts we give it, it's just not for us. And as we know from hard experience, we can hold on to those things and do our best to fit that square peg into the round hole. We can do our best to try and make it work for us, no matter how much forcing and shoving we have to do. And in the end, it just doesn't work. At some point, we have to admit to ourselves and to each other that that might not be our gift. Friends, no one is good at everything, but everyone is good at something. And sometimes we spend so much of our time holding on so tightly to those things we long to be able to do that we are not open enough to embrace those things that we can. But the truth will set us free. And so we ought not to be afraid of it. And so we have it, 3 hints for finding our spiritual gifts. We should do it in community. We should not be afraid to fail, and we should rejoice in the truth. Now, maybe there are those out there today who found their gift a long time ago and are running with it. To you, I will ask, are you using it for the common good? If not, let's figure it out together. But there are others out there who are still looking for their gifts. Maybe all of us are still looking in some ways for those things that God has given us to use for the common good in this world. For those, I would say, we have come to the right place. This community at its best is a place where we can share our gifts, where we can find our gifts for one another. In less than an hour, we will be standing downstairs voting upon our nominations report. Flipping through those pages, we see some of the many ways that members in this church are giving of themselves. Not all of the ways. There are things that never show up in a report, but we see many of them right there. The ways that people are using their gifts for the common good right here, whether it's in the hands-on outreach ministries where we're feeding the hungry or clothing the naked or healing the sick, or the ministries that support them. The ministries that make those things possible. The point is, every single person here has a gift to be shared. And if you don't know what it is yet, let us find it together. Because once we do, we can begin to dream in earnest. We will be continuing to dream in the next few months. As you know, we've been dreaming for the last few. But we're getting ready to shift in that process. Starting Lent, which, believe it or not, is just a couple of weeks away, we will be taking down our dream board from the Gathering Center. Don't worry, you can still dream. But during this season of Lent, we are asking each and every member of this community to spend at least one moment praying for this church, praying for some direction about where we are heading, praying about where these dreams might take us and how the gifts we have been given might be used to get us there. Now, some of us have the gift of praying on our own, and to those among us, we would say, use it. But others of us need a community around us when we pray. And to them, we would say, during the season of Lent, every Wednesday evening, we will have the labyrinth open and a contemplative service here in the chancel called the service of Taizé. Use that time, if you will, to take a moment to pray for the direction of this church. Maybe you want to take one of the classes that Cady or Kathy is offering on the wilderness or on spirituality to find a way to be in prayer. The point is this: use the gift of time, those 6 weeks, to at least once ask, where are we going as a church? Friends, the dreams that have already been shared are powerful and profound and prophetic. But it's just a start. If we want to bring them to life, it will take each and every one of us using our gifts for the common good. Friends, no one is good at everything. But everyone is good at something. And if we doubt that a single dream can make a difference, let us remember the man whose birthday we celebrate tomorrow. A man who used his gift to trust a dream to a community he hoped would bring it to life. And while it's true that in many ways that dream continues to find its way in this world, that we haven't quite realized his dream yet, it's also true that the world is a better place because he shared it. And so, my fellow gifted travelers, dream on. Amen.